Scanners came to me at a point where I was extremely busy with my career. This was sort of the tail end of my New World Pictures run, and at the start of doing stuff for United Artists and the bigger real studio stuff. So it was kind of an in-between diversion, really, because I was kind of like going like this in LA, and it was just kind of like boom, 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 boom. Oh, Scanners over here. Then race back. Okay, jump right back into the next thing. And of course, in film, you don't know what your work is going to look like on screen till 6 months, a year later. Depends. If it's a New World picture, it's 3 weeks later. But on most pictures, it's like a year later. So you kind of like, oh yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, that turned out pretty good. Or they cut that out. Well, whatever. So the whole Scanners thing was more about the experience rather than the film for me, because I remember the experience, and the film was great, loved it, thought it was fantastically put together, and that moment, I know that exploding head was so impacting to so many people. I know Steven Spielberg absolutely loves that shot. I was a monster kid. I love monsters. I love monster movies. I always wanted to somehow make that part of my life. So even as a little kid, I was always playing with clay and drawing little figures all over my homework and all the stuff that gets kids in trouble that are monster fans like me. And that just grew into theater in high school and college. And then in college kind of decided really if I was going to get serious about it, I needed to get into film, and so moved to California and worked at Disney for a year shipping film, and decided that was going to be the long way around anywhere. So I quit, went to school a little bit more, ran out of money, and then went to work for a Halloween mask making company, Downpost Studios. And that was really the start of how I got into doing monster stuff, because they did some stuff for television, some stuff for movies. And so I worked my way up in the company and into the lab where they really got into some of that fun stuff. And then, when they finally said, yeah, we want you to be a big part of the company, and we're just going to concentrate on masks and not do any more film stuff, I was devastated and just kind of, oh, great. That was a year's work to not get it where I was going. So I set off on a partnership with one of the other guys there, Bob Short, and we worked for a year working on different low-budget films, commercials, anything we could get into. But it was a great time because I think that was just about when Star Wars came out, and suddenly everyone in town needed aliens. So I got to do a lot of earning while I learned at that point, because it was just one job after the other, 2 or 3 at a time. And just developing as I went along. And that's where Scanners came in, actually. I had been doing a lot of stuff individually out of my home garage, and then I got a call to work for Tom Berman, who was one of the big names in monster making at the time. I went and I worked there on a couple of pictures, Popeye and Cutter's Way, I think it was. And then I got a call from Dick Smith. And Dick Smith was my hero, as he was many, many people's hero. So I was like stunned that he was calling me. And he called me up, and Rick Baker had referred me. And Dick said he was advising on this picture in Montreal, and he needed somebody who was familiar with materials and stuff to help out for a couple of weeks. I couldn't refuse Dick Smith. And Tom Berman was great about it. I said, Dick Smith asked me to go to Montreal, and he said, when Dick Smith calls, you have to go. So yeah, that was great. I thought that was a really cool moment. And so I did. And that's how I got on Scanners. The first actual film that I worked on set on was Piranha, that Joe Dante directed for New World Pictures. And so New World was really the one place that was incredibly cheap. It had just enough money to actually make monster movies and creature movies and stuff that had the rubber works in it. And so once I got sort of known at New World Pictures, it was just a lot of work, you know, and I don't even know half the movies I worked on because there were a couple of production managers I knew well there who they'd literally phone me up and say, have you got a mask for this? I need some severed limbs. Have you got a cut off head? You know, and I'd literally just show up on the corner of 8th and Main kind of thing and you know, okay. And so there's a lot of stuff, I have no idea what it was to this day. One of the things I never knew, I painted the original mask for Halloween. I was at Don Post Studios. I had just gone from being sort of like the starter painter to the custom painting. And custom paintings where they were doing all the old great Universal horror masks and stuff. And so this was like going, yeah, I can finally show my stuff and do some intricate airbrushing and all that stuff. And literally, I think it was the first or second day I was in that department. The head of the lab comes over with this black rubber mask and he goes, this is for a movie, you have to paint it. And I'm like, okay, great, what do you want me to do? And he's like, just paint it white. I'm like, yeah, but I can do some toning and I can, you know, put some veins on it. No, just paint it white. I was like, oh, okay, so this is the big time, huh? So I painted it white, it went off, and I didn't even know till a few years ago that was actually the mask that was used in Halloween. It was literally the head of the lab said, oh yeah, Chris Wayless painted that mask. And I was like, oh, and then it got back to me and like, okay, cool. That was worth it then. I don't mind that I didn't get to paint it up cool. So but there was a lot of that kind of stuff that was going on back then because it was a crazy time for creature stuff. This is like late 70s, very, very early 80s even. And it was just anybody who could make anything in town had work because there was a lot of it around. There was a lot of terrible work. There were a lot of really low budget, crummy movies being made, but they all wanted monsters or aliens, and you know, every third movie needed a Star Wars cantina scene in it. And it was simply, at that point in time, was word of mouth. Hey, you know, this guy, he does the stuff, he shows up on time, you know, we can afford him. So it was good. On the production, Dick Smith had signed on as the advisor. He couldn't take the picture because he was on another movie at the time. And so I was to come in for a 2 to 3 week period to sort of keep things running while Dick was finishing up the other movie. So I went to Montreal, and I think I'd shot in Mexico or something. That was the most out of the country I'd been. Montreal was like going to another world as far as I was concerned. And this was a time when the Canadian government was financing films to get their sort of film business burgeoning. So these films tended to be very crazy productions because it was all about tax havens and timing and everything. So a lot of these pictures would have this long drawn out trying to get it into production and then had to be in production by the end of the year to make the tax break or whatever it was. And so it was with scanners. And David Cronenberg was, you know, he was really clever about that. I mean, really took advantage of it and made a number of films through that process. And so this one, I kind of went to Montreal and it had not been really that well set up. I basically got a phone call from the production manager, said, hey, get on a plane, get over here, we need you for a couple of weeks. Just like Dick Smith said. Okay, great. And so I showed up and nobody there to meet me, didn't know where to go, that kind of stuff. And phoned up, said, oh yeah, here's the address. And everybody was going crazy. So I was like an afterthought because I wasn't actually shooting. They were already shooting when I got there. And showed up in this old building, a nice old building, and they said, yeah, makeup's down in the basement. I'm like, down in the basement? Okay, that's okay in LA. You get down into the basements in East Coast and stuff, and you get a lot of mold, cold, and stuff that doesn't really help the material processes. But that's what we had there. And that's where I met Stéphane Dupuis, who had been already on the show, very talented guy, didn't have that much experience with a lot of the materials, the more technical materials at the time, but a brilliant artist. And He and I got along like a house on fire, as they say, and he had set up a lab in the basement and with an assistant, Tom Schwartz, a great guy who I think was out of New York. My first conversation with David Cronenberg was on the set in the midst of all this insanity, and literally just dragged to the set and to talk about something, and the production's going full speed ahead, racing all over, and David just kind of turns and goes, okay, I need a dart going into the guy's hand, and blah, 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 props will give you this, and okay, fine, I'm used to the assignment kind of stuff. But it wasn't really kind of like that well planned out. A lot of the stuff was very off the cuff, spur of the moment kind of thing, because the production had been really rushed into production, and David was literally writing the script as he was filming. I think he'd had, his first rough short pass, and he was fleshing it all out, adapting it for the limitations of the production, the locations and everything else, while he's filming. So I have so much admiration for what he pulled off on that film. I was completely astonished. If anything gets to him, you'll never know it. Most directors, fly off the handle and react by screaming back and whatever it is, taking out on this person or that person, or however. That's a lot of pressure directing a movie. But Dave Cronenberg was never ever like that. I've seen him kind of perturbed at bad situations, but always in control, always level-headed about it, saw beyond the problem, and guided everybody to the solution. Really, really always impressed with him as a filmmaker in that regard. My relationship with Cronenberg was never a buddy-buddy kind of thing. It wasn't like, yeah, we're having fun together, which you do get with some directors. It's kind of like, yeah, we're making this movie together, it's really crazy, it's really fun, or whatever. And Cronenberg was always more, this guy does what I need done, and he's good about it, I can deal with him. Not in that clinical a way, but always very aware of the best way to achieve his vision. And it was, he knows who's right for what job. And that's, I think, his greatest attribute, is that he, much more so than most directors, hires the best people he can hire and trusts those people to do the best job they can do, and just helps guide them to it. Most directors, and I've worked with a lot of directors, and they feel they have to have their input, and when they really don't know what they're talking about, and they'll say, yeah, well, shouldn't he have like more horns and whatever, and it's just sort of random stuff to keep the conversation going, and it's a bunch of baloney most of the time. So it's really refreshing to be able to work with a director that knows his vision completely. Just even if he doesn't have a script, he knows his vision. So the conversations you have with that director are absolute real conversations that are part of the film that's being made. And they're not part of, egos or political situations or anything else. It's all about making the film the best way possible. As far as the exploding head goes, there really wasn't a plan. There really wasn't a plan. It was in the script, and that was about it. It was kind of the sort of one line, and then his head explodes. Being used to New World productions, it wasn't a big deal. It was kind of like Mad Panic's the way to go anyway on those productions. So we got Louis Del Gran and got a head cast on him. He was great to deal with. Some actors just cannot stand being covered in alginate or silicone or whatever, and he was fantastic. And so we made this head, which was, there's been a lot of talk over the years about what was inside it and how it was made, and I've read stuff from dog intestines to chicken guts and all. There was nothing organic in it at all. It was all Caro blood, and it was all the leftovers from the lab floor, actually. It was, we had a lot of foam, we'd run foam latex, and it was all the scraps and the edging and rolled latex and thrown in there, and there's some wax in there, and just different densities of material so that when it popped, it didn't all go evenly, so that it was a little jumbled. But it was a gelatin casting, exterior, and I did a plaster inner lining, thin plaster, and then we filled that full of gunk, and then we sealed it off, and then we put in the eyes, and they had to get cut back in. I remember we had a mad panic because Stefan was doing the cutting and he went a little too deep through the plaster, and so suddenly it started bleeding through the eyes. Like, okay, don't worry, we can fix this. Mad panic, and we got that sorted out. And then we got to the location, which was an auditorium in a business building, I think. Very nice, very clean, very sort of newish. And they said, well, we're just gonna blow it up here. And I'm like, that's not really a good idea. This is like, Caro syrup blood is the most destructive element in film, because if it gets on something, it's either gonna stain it, or it's gonna ruin it, or it's not gonna come off. So I knew that they were gonna pay a fortune in cleaning fees if they actually wound up doing it on the location. So we had a long discussion about it and said, yeah, we'll put it back. And so they shot that later on, actually after I'd left. But what was interesting was it was a mad panic to get it ready to not shoot. Initially, it was going to be just a close-up of the head. And then it was going to be down here. And then it was, well, can we see his hands on the desk? And well, we kind of had a mad panic to get those hands together, which in fact are these hands. We molded my hands, did a quick form to put everything on, got on the location, and then realized Louis had established a gold ring on, I think, his right hand. And so Stefan took the gold cigarette liner, cigarette pack liner out of his cigarette pack and did a quick mortician's wax ring and covered it in that. And so we were totally prepped, and then, well, cancel that shoot. But that's film. Yeah, when we were doing the movie, we really had no idea that the exploding head effect was going to be such a major impacting moment in film, in genre, and in culture in general. You know, this is something that, I don't know even how many years later it is, decades later, showing up on the internet every couple of weeks in a different form or with a different reference. And so it's funny looking back on that and thinking, yeah, well, I look back and I remember freezing in the basement, you know, mixing ice cold Caro's blood syrup in this gelatin head. I don't remember the audience response, but it's great to be connected with that kind of thing. The thing that Scanners did for me was get a little bit more, I think, international notice, because it was written up in a lot of coverage in Europe and in Canada and in Japan. And my reputation in town was pretty good by that point. So things were really on the upswing for me. But the exploding head became pretty iconic. I mean, I was known for that. And when I was working at ILM on Raiders of the Lost Ark, Richard Edlund comes to me and he said, you know, George wants to do something happened with these characters at the end of the movie, or they were going to burst into flames or something like that. But I think Stevens suggested maybe an exploding head, and I said, I think we may know somebody who can help us with that. So that was the original plan with the Raiders heads, where they were all going to explode. And then I'm pretty sure it was Richard who said, well, is there anything else we can do with them to give them some variety? I said, I've always wanted to do a melting head. And he said, great, go for it. I probably shouldn't have said that because it was a lot of work, but it was fun, you know. But that came about because I'd done the exploding head on Scanners. I think for me, the most interesting part of working on Scanners was learning about the nature of a film crew. Because, you know, when I was in LA shooting local locations, shooting studios, it was all very professional. Everybody felt like everybody was at home. Going to another country and in effect another culture to work with a foreign crew, it's a little kind of intimidating and you think you're going to be the outsider, and that was absolutely not the case. It was that there was a universality to what being on a film crew meant wherever you went. And it was everybody's going to do their job and everybody's going to help everybody else get the job done. And there's one thing that's important, and it's making the movie. And that's something that stayed with me. I got it from Scanners, but every time I've gone any place, filming, it was always everybody pulling together. We're on a film. I don't care what languages we'll figure it out. If we got to do sign languages, we'll do sign languages. We're going to work together. We're going to make this happen. And that, over the years, has been one of the most continually satisfying elements of working in film, is that you get to meet with all these great, incredibly talented, very skilled people who are committed to doing the best job they can and helping you do the best job you can. It's great.